Hey folks, it's Theo over at the Batman Universe, here with another TBU special. On October the 15th, Batman Resurrection releases to bookstores everywhere and online from Penguin Random House. Its author, John Jackson Miller, took a moment to sit with Scott and Ian to talk about the book and what readers might expect once the book releases on the 15th. I'm very happy that he was able to sit down with him, and I hope you all enjoy the interview. So here is Scott and Ian talking to John Jackson Miller about Batman Resurrection, and I'll see you on the other side.
Hey, Bat fans, you're listening to a TBU Specials podcast. I'm your host, Scott, and
I'm your host, Ian.
in this episode, we're thrilled to be joined by New York Times bestselling author John Jackson Miller, who's written Star Wars A New Dawn, Star Wars Kenobi, a slew of Knights of the Old Republic, Mass Effect, Simpsons, and Iron Man comics, and countless other books for Star Wars, Star Trek, and more. Today, we'll be chatting about his latest upcoming novel, Batman Resurrection, which debuts on Tuesday, October 15th. For those who haven't heard yet, Batman Resurrection is a direct prose sequel to Batman 1989. It takes place between 89 and Batman Returns, and will have some familiar faces from the Tim Burton Batverse. Please welcome John Jackson Miller. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. How are you?
Hey, glad to be here.
Yeah,
Getting
we're looking.
exciting because we're just a week away when we're recording this.
Yeah, no, and it's I've been eagerly watching this since the announcement back in, oh God, it was months and months ago
It was
when I
yeah, I
saw.
think it was April, the same week that my most recent Star Wars novel came out, and The Living Force. And I think it was not the thing people were expecting me to announce next, and it was not the thing that I was expecting to write next. So it's wonderful that the opportunity came up.
Well, speaking of which, that actually dives right into one of the first questions I have for you on this is, for Burton Batman fans, another story set in that universe feels kind of like a dream. How does a
Yeah.
book like this get made?
Well, I have been working in comics for about 30 years. I worked for the company that Comics Buyer's Guide. I worked for that magazine for many years. I did price guides, various other things. And then when I started doing comics, it was over at writing comics. It was over at Marvel. I did Iron Man for a year. That led to me getting Star Wars comics at Dark Horse. I wrote Knights of the Old Republic. And then I went into Star Wars novels, and that led to Star Trek novels, and then I've had all these other licensed properties that I've done things for. Um, I did Battlestar Galactica comics for Dynamite, for example, for the 40th anniversary of that show. And so I've had all these different franchises that I was a fan of in my younger years, and got the opportunity to do tie-ins for. But whenever anybody would ask, what's a franchise you haven't gotten to write for that would be a dream, project, as you say, I never really mentioned Tim Burton's Batman as a thing distinct from Batman in general or anything like that, because it just didn't seem like they would ever license something that was that well defined, where was that narrowly defined. But that became much more a possibility as we got into the 2000s and 2010s. We got Batman 66 comics. We got the Batman 89 comics from Sam Hamm, the screenwriter, and my friend Joe Quinones, who actually did covers of some of my Star Wars comics much earlier. And the fact that they were beginning to actually focus on the Tim Burton movies, Batman Returns, as their own coherent world, separate from even the later Schumacher movies, which had some of the same actors in them. that was something I never thought I could even ask for. I will say that I did ask the Batman 66 editor, back at San Diego like a dozen years ago. I said, if you ever do any Batman 89 comics, I'm your guy. And he said, you're like the 40th person who's asked that. And of course it didn't happen, but it has happened now, and particularly with Michael Keaton and Tim Burton sort of having a moment again, and Keaton's version of Batman showing up in the Flash. All of these things sort of added up to when Random House got the rights to do novels based on this portion of the cinematic experience for Batman. My editor on Star Wars, The Living Force, is the editor on Batman Resurrection. He approached me and said, "Yeah, you're the guy that saw the movie 12 times in the theater, right?" And I said, "Yeah," and I kept the ticket stubs. I was that guy. I mean, I have the standee back here. Nobody can see it in the audio, but yeah, I've got the Batman standee I had back then. I got the Batman cup from Taco Bell, which I'm not trying to use anymore. But so basically, Batman was a big deal for me. I reviewed it for my college paper. It came out the very first night. Batman remains loyal to legend, or remains true to legend. And so he thought I would be a natural to fit into this, and I yelped. I was like, yes, this is a very cool idea, and I wanted to be part of it immediately. And the way that we worked it out, I said, let's do this set between Batman and Batman Returns, so as to avoid any duplication of what Sam and Joe are doing, because Sam and Joe in the comics are set more than a year after Batman Returns. And I committed to myself that I would not reuse or go over any ground already established by them. This is not necessarily the same thing, I should say, as saying that it's one universe,
Right.
but I'm not going to do Billy D. Williams as Two-Face when they've already done that story. I'm gonna, and so we had conversations with Warner Brothers in DC to make sure that for example, one of the villains that is the one that we've announced that is in Batman Resurrection, Clayface, was free. And so we did that, and then it became a matter of me coming up with a way to actually write a story that felt true to what I saw on screen and what everybody saw on screen, something that felt like it would have fit in sort of the Tim Burton style. Obviously, Clayface, for example, is not going to be a shambling mound like you see in the comics or in some of the cartoons. It was going to be a Batman from the Golden Age, or rather, a Clayface from the Golden Age. It was going to be, the actor, or at least we'll get to see the acting world. It's going to be, the character is going to be more grotesque, like like you would see in a Tim Burton movie, where it's not, there are no metahumans in the Tim Burton movies. About the only real super unnatural things you see happening, or how fast Smilex works in terms of transforming people. Batman's technology is obviously way far down past anybody else's, but you don't have that sort of moment that I think we all had who were watching Batman Forever at the time. when we're seeing the Riddler with a device that allows him to read dreams. That's something that you don't really see in those first two films, because the first two films are much more rooted in a practical effects world, and so almost certainly Clayface would be as well. And so at all junctures in writing this book, I'm sort of asking, how would they play it? How would they do it? And everything having to do with the level of technology within the book itself. You have this interesting mixture of 1940s and 1980s that's in the Burton movies, and so all of this comes together in Batman Resurrection.
And that, I mean, that makes a lot of sense because what you're saying about like the fantastical elements, I'm thinking back to it about both of those films. And I think, one of the things that comes to mind is like Catwoman's transformation. There's like hints and like allegories you could take there, but nothing explicit with her
No, I mean
rebirth. The
she,
most mystical thing is how many bullets she could take, I guess you could say,
yeah,
with
I
her
mean
nine lives.
yeah, they show her going through awnings. So when
Yeah.
she falls, so there are moments there, and one of the things that I did, and again, this is kind of fun. My original column about the movie back in 1989, I finished the column by saying I have questions. I have questions about this movie. There's stuff in it that doesn't necessarily make sense to me at the time, and I'm able to actually go into some of these things in the movie, or rather in the novel, because one of the elements of the novel is this is the aftermath of the Joker. This is several months down the line, but he's still very much on the mind of Bruce Wayne. He's still very much having an impact on the psyche of people in Gotham City. And so I'm able to explore some of these questions. Um, not the least of which is, okay, it's one of the things which is common, or not common, one of the things that's unique to this version of Batman is that Jack Napier killed Bruce Wayne's parents, and he's now paid the ultimate penalty. Um, why Batman then? Why Batman? And I looked at that and I said, well, how can I tie this into my story? How can I tie this into questions about Vicky Vale? How can I tie this into questions about Alfred, and would they not think, hey, aren't you done? Haven't you accomplished everything you need to do now? Can't everybody take it from here? Yeah, I'm able to delve into sort of all of these issues because I did make the decision to sort of hug the first film. And yet I could also show characters from the second movie. I tweeted today that kind of a fun thing that I've done here is, I'm pretending there was a novel that came out in the fall of 1989 that had full knowledge of what happened in the first movie and Batman Returns, which would not have been possible back then because they hadn't even written it yet. But this is how it sort of, I think in my sort of fantasy brain, should feel that we are fresh out of Batman Returns, or rather, fresh out of Batman, rather. But in addition to seeing the aftermath of that, we also get to see, what did Max Schreck think of the Joker? What does Max Schreck think of Batman? uh Characters like Selena Kyle. And there are various characters that are available to appear as long as they don't run into Bruce Wayne.
Hmm. And that's interesting. Also, I'm
Well,
excited
Max
to read
Max
that in
can.
Christopher
Max can.
Walken's.
Selena can't.
Yeah. I'm kind of interested to read that in Christopher Walken's voice too, not gonna lie. One
We love
question I
writing his
had
stuff.
One question I have though, I mean, we've talked a lot about the characters in Batman. So, this picks up right after 89. How do
Several
we
months.
how do
Several
we
months after.
find okay. How do we find Gotham City in this?
Okay.
Like what are, beyond like our major players, what's kind of the city's landscape and in your view?
Okay. One of the major elements is that this is a city that is been traumatized. It is scarred by what the Joker did. Not just the fact that, he's this crazy person that, nearly killed everybody at the parade. But if you think about it, this is a major city that has suffered a chemical weapons attack. And Smilex gas, and then previously the Smilex poisonings. Now remember, all Batman did was tell people how not to get Smilex into their systems. It was still out there, and people still suffered from it. And one of the elements in this book that I enjoyed writing, I'm always looking for ways for Bruce Wayne to actually do something useful. And that's one of the places where he finds something useful to do. A thing that differentiates Burton's Bruce Wayne and really Keaton's Bruce Wayne from other Bruce Waynes in other universes is that he's not pretending to be a playboy. He's actually an active part of society. He was expected at the banquet for Harvey Dent at the beginning of the movie. He's there having a party trying to save the bicentennial. He's working with the mayor to prevent Max Schreck from putting up his giant power plant. You get the notion that he's very much a mover and a shaker, and he's actually doing things that Batman cannot. And one of the things that he's involved with is helping the city deal with the aftermath of the chemical weapons attack. And we get into some detail with that. And we can get into that kind of detail because it's a novel, and the novel really has, it's almost as long as both adaptations of Batman and Batman Returns put together. I mean, we've got room to deal with some of these questions. We've got room to deal with questions like, well, what does it mean for Alexander Knox to go from covering Batman as an urban legend to covering him as a beat, as a source, as a daily part of his job? What happens to Commissioner Gordon? Gordon is, again, another character that is unique in the Burton verse, if you want to call it that. I always hesitate to use a word that DC or Warner Brothers doesn't use or hasn't used yet. But what's different about the Pat Hingle Commissioner Gordon is he's much older than we see in almost every other version. So this is a man who's at the end of his career. He's done 40 years, probably started walking a beat. And I decided that he was in the Navy even before that. Probably in WW2. And he here he is about ready to retire. He's had enough of this city. And here comes Batman. Logistically, how is he supposed to work with him when he's a vigilante? How would he feel about this guy? And then what kind of a relationship can I show with these characters? Because we have in Gordon really the voice of wisdom that he can't get quite the same voice from Alfred. Alfred is able to give him some kinds of guidance. But on practical things, we have moments, we have conversations between Batman and Alfred and Batman and the Commissioner in this book, where Gordon is kind of saying, okay, look, you're still new to this. I've been doing this for 40 years. You're going to run yourself into the ground if you pursue a particular lead nonstop. You have to understand you're going to lose some people sometimes. The sort of thing that we don't have those moments in Batman, and by the time we get into Batman Returns, it's clear that he has the complete and total faith of the city and of the mayor and of Commissioner Gordon. And how did that happen? What does Harvey Dent think of this guy? How is the district attorney going to handle having a vigilante producing evidence? What does that do? And again, these are little logistical things that you're like, okay, yeah, they would never put that in a movie. No, but they might put it in an 8 episode series. And that's kind of the way a novel more or less, feels stretched out to. And so yeah, we have room. We have some conversation. My editor said, sometimes our scenes just where Bruce and Alfred are at the breakfast table, when it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon and Bruce has only now gotten in, are just as fun as anything else that we do.
And it sounds really like everything you've been saying and kind of illuminating in your thoughts and, what could go on to bridge those two movies. It sounds like you have a really large sandbox to play
Yeah,
with. It even, more than I would have initially thought just hearing the 2 second pitch.
yeah.
So,
And also, okay, we have I have the benefit of having worked, and Random House has the benefit of having worked with Star Wars all these years. Me as well with Star Trek, where we kind of know these books have to be more than just tying together the connections. There's got to be a story here. This is not about how we get from Batman to Batman Returns. We're not going to close off every possible avenue, because you could very well have, as you had between Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back, countless number of stories. And so there's a bit of what I call environmental storytelling that I do. I always say that I treat Star Wars or Star Trek or whatever it is like a national park. I try to not leave my footprints everywhere. I try to have a narrow footprint. I try to pack out what I bring in. But while I play with a lot of the toys here, this is not all about just answering every single question. Did Knox ever get his grant? This is this you got to leave some stuff.
yeah, true. Did they ever open those 6 cases of champagne? Um,
Exactly.
so you had the first chapter was released on Polygon. I have a link below.
It is a chapter. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not the first, but it is
Okay.
a representative
All right.
chapter. It's where Batman encounters Clayface.
And I was reading it and this dawned on me. So two things, we talked a little bit about, the characterization of Batman, and I was wondering, how did you find and construct the voice for Batman, but also, something that's not seen, and we've been talking a lot about Bruce Wayne,
Yeah.
is there a shift in the way that you write Batman versus Bruce Wayne? You know how he always like Batman incarnations always switch their voices, and it seems like
Yeah.
there's two distinct entities there. Is that
Yeah.
something that carries over into the book?
Yes. There is one of the things that I did 20 years ago. I wrote my first Star Wars story for Dark Horse, and it was a Darth Vader story. And one of the pieces of advice I got from my editor was, we don't let Darth Vader talk too much. A little goes a long way. He's not chatty. He doesn't. He's not having really long conversations. And so what I try to do is, Batman does not talk that much unless he's talking to Alfred directly in a situation where they can speak, or you'll actually notice that he'll talk a little more with the commissioner because he's growing more comfortable with him. Uh, but he won't talk to Alexander Knox much at all, because he's what Knox has met both Bruce Wayne and Batman, and that's probably true of the commissioner too. But I think he's a little bit more worried about the reporter because he doesn't necessarily trust him. And of course, there's many reasons where he might not. So yeah, I'm always looking at his voice. One of the fun things about that chapter is I have to deal with some of the logistics of Batman getting around town. I deal with some of the logistics of does he have the same costume during the day and the night? And that goes back all the way back to when they were filming Batman in '89, and they thought about doing a daylight sequence, and they realized the costume didn't look good. Well, I sort of nod to that here, and so we because we have this space. I get to deal with logistical things like, well, what happens when there's trouble or when the bat signal goes up, and Bruce Wayne is in Gotham City and his costume is somewhere else, or his Batmobile is somewhere else, back at the Batcave. We get to deal with some of putting some obstacles in front of him like that, and how easy is it to change in the back of a limo? We get to, it's not that easy, as it turns out.
Sounds fun. We want to get into some of the characters and things that are going on in this world, but one thing I wanted to ask before we move on, just because, that chapter you mentioned that was out, there was a small line in there that I almost zipped over as I was reading everything else and taking it in because, compared to everything else, it wasn't the focus. But there was a line that said Lawrence's masked retrobates. And I wanted to ask you
Ah,
because we've
Lord.
seen this character pop up in the '89 miniseries, seems to be a
Yeah.
fan favorite. Is he someone that will be appearing in Batman Resurrection?
Well, obviously, yes,
Okay.
because we mentioned him there. Well, here's the thing. He lived. He lived. He survived. That was one of the few things that I actually had to frame through the movie on, because otherwise I remember all the lines. But it was like, okay, I just need to make absolutely sure that when he went through that floor, we could pretend that there was a floor underneath. Because the boxer ends up going all the way down the shaft, and there's no bringing him back. There's no awning down there. Uh, so, I mean, he's a character who has no lines in the movie, but everybody recognizes him and everybody knows him. And this is another element of what we were talking about, the aftermath of Batman '89. What has become of the underworld in Batman, or in Gotham City rather, because we have had, the Joker has completely, devastated, the organized crime families. And what we were told at the end of the first movie is that Batman and the police have rounded up all of the Joker's men. Um, well, that leaves a very big power vacuum for somebody. And could there possibly be other people who are attracted to the whole idea of the Joker? One of the elements that comes up pretty early is Batman having to come to terms with the fact that his very existence may be attracting and creating, these oversized characters, these villains, and that's not a new idea, but it was a newer idea in 1989. So, that's another thing. I have the benefit of having seen what has been done, in 30 years since then, and then also in a bunch of other Batman stories. So, I think that our version is going to feel unique. It should feel like the Tim Burton, Michael Keaton version, and our takes on the characters, like Clayface, for example, um, should be Burton-esque in the sense that these characters, he doesn't tend to have characters that are just outside of the Joker, who is designed out of the gate to be irredeemable from the beginning. We have in the Penguin, in Catwoman, we have tragic figures who are searching for uh, something they have lost or could never get or never had. And so to an extent, Clayface has a tragedy to himself in this book. This all goes back to there was a line I've been using it for years. I was pretty sure it came from Gene Siskel, from Siskel and Ebert, but I have not been able to find where he actually said it. That Batman Returns was an opera about loneliness, and I always liked that because it seems like Batman, Catwoman, Penguin, all of these characters are basically trying to sort out their personal issues on this large scale, and they just happen to do a lot of property damage in the way that they're doing it, and even the Joker as well. I mean, these are always, and this was in my review in '89, that these figures are titans that are walking around Gotham City, even though they don't have metahuman powers or anything like that. It is the city that is suffering as they are clashing with one another, almost like forces of nature.
So, in addition to returning characters like Lawrence and sort of foreshadowing or just introducing characters from Batman Returns, like, of course, Max Schreck and
Yeah.
Selena Kyle, we also have some new versions of characters, as we've talked about Basil Carlo, and there's hints of people like Julie Madison and others. Are there any new to this universe characters you feel comfortable talking about, like casting for
Yeah.
90s actors or 80s actors?
I'm trying to avoid the casting question, particularly because one of the characters from the Rogues Gallery that we have not announced, that we're trying to keep secret until people have read the book, that's one where I have a very definite mental casting for. But that's the thing is, I haven't done. I have a number of characters that I figure probably would turn up in a movie or turn up in a story, turn up in the orbit. We have the basically many years before CSI or anything like that. I figured that the Gotham City coroner would be somebody that Batman would have to get to know. And so I have an interesting character there. She's a lot of fun. Likewise, the administrator of Gotham General Hospital. Again, this is somebody who I've created that has a significant role because in addition to that character's job and what that job entails in this book, um, I said, okay, this is going to be somebody that Thomas Wayne knew really well, and that allows me to get into some dynamics that I wasn't able to do with some other characters. So there's just a lot of fun stuff that happens here, and it's not all just about callbacks or the scenes we didn't get to see.
Right. And now that you've opened this up and taken this new direction with this incarnation of Batman, do you have any plans or ideas for a follow-up to Batman Resurrection? Anywhere that you would like to take the character even further if you could?
Yes. And we're definitely yeah. I will say that we when is this airing?
That is up to our editor, I believe. Well, I can't make any promises, but I would like to say before the book launches.
I would say keep an eye on the news. Look for news on this score. Yeah, I definitely approached this knowing that I wanted to you not do just one. And so this is something where I'm very, very pleased with how things have worked out.
I love that answer. And between this and the comment about exploring the idea of a power vacuum in Gotham, the gears are turning here. So,
Oh yeah, oh
um,
yeah.
as far as the title goes, I'm curious if you can even answer this question. It might be too early because the book's not out yet, but what does resurrection relate to? Because
It's
obviously that's a deliberate choice.
yeah, multiple things. And people as they read it will realize, okay, this is perfect. One of the things that I looked at is, well, can I match the Burton films? And the problem is the only real example is Batman Returns as the sequel. There was reportedly Batman Continues was the working title of the third movie. So this leaves us with is basically a verb. And I looked for Batman and then a verb, and I could not come up with anything that I liked. And then I realized, okay, everything involved in this story, there's a personal resurrection. There's a character brought back more or less from the dead. There is a character that they're worried is back from the dead. There's all sorts of things going on, in this story, and it just feels like that's the right thing. And I figured, okay, our resurrection that gets us the first two letters of returns, and it also sets up a dynamic that can be used in the future. So yeah, I also what I did is I went back and looked up. There are no Batman Resurrection books except for Resurrection of Ra's al Ghul, and that doesn't count because it's got of Ra's al Ghul, and I'm not bringing him in. So so yeah, I've had this thing that I've had to do with everything I've done. Star Wars: The Living Force. It was amazing that it had never been used for a novel. And my Star Wars Kenobi, again, never been used for a novel. I'm just really, really happy when you can find something like that. It's like, holy cow.
Yeah, well, it's a powerful one, but obviously there's a depth there, and so
Yeah.
it sounds rich. Also, I will note that you called him racial ghoul, so as someone in that camp, I appreciate that.
This is the thing. I grew up as a Marvel zombie. And it was Teen Titans and Batman that got me to crossover. Teen Titans because again everybody's reading X-Men was also reading Teen Titans. And then Batman because when I was starting to go to the comic shop, that's when Frank Miller is doing his books, and then yeah, Alan Moore and everything else like that. I have a much longer spiel that I go into or have gone into on the importance of this movie in terms of changing the public perception, not just of Batman, but of comics in general. And because there was a disjoint between what people thought about comics for years, because of really the outsize um, influence of Batman 66. Um, every news story about comics for decades would have, you know, Holy Millionaire or whatever, comics worth a lot of money, or Holy Millions, Batman, comics worth a lot of money, or Biff Pow Bam, comics are a serious business or something would be in the headlines somewhere. And this all was part of that sort of in comics we have had for decades, and still have it to a degree, a persecution complex that goes all the way back to the 1950s when they tried to ban comics as causing juvenile delinquency, and so there was this definite the thing in the 80s about being afraid that Tim Burton and Michael Keaton would make an embarrassing version of Batman was literally that. We were afraid that it's just going to continue that imprint for years to come. And the thing is, what the general fans didn't know, but which my colleagues that I later worked with, Maggie Thompson and Don Thompson at Comics Buyer's Guide, what they did know, and this is the reason they were telling everybody to calm down when people would write about that, is they knew Michael Uslan, and they knew that he was a comics fan who had bought the rights to the movies, and that he had been working hard to try to get a version of Batman that was more reflective of the character, in at least in the 70s, but definitely in the 80s, or really here, as he put it when he was describing the films to me, years later. This is really Batman in the 30s and 40s in the Burton verse, if you want to use that phrase. And again, when that movie happened, I remember thinking at the end of it, that when we see the camera going up the tower, and Batman staring at the bat signal, with the cape flying, and the music climbing, and in my audience the first night, because it was a preview, everybody was going nuts. But I remember thinking, and I would write this several times in later articles, that the movie had redeemed comics in the popular culture. And I don't just mean Batman, but comics in general. It made it possible for you to be in Hollywood and promote the notion of a serious film, like The Rocketeer, within just 2 years. A really serious film like The Crow within just 5 years. Based on small press books. You could never imagine any of those things being greenlit without Batman '89.
Yeah, kind of building off of that question, I wanted to ask you about your perspective on why Batman is so fascinating after 85 years, and why specifically. I mean, you've talked about how it's serious and darker, but there have been serious and dark Batman movies after Tim Burton and Michael
Yeah,
Keaton. Why do you think this particular one has lasted so
yeah.
long, even against, Christopher Nolan and Michael Reeves?
I think that this particular Batman has the benefit of Tim Burton's sensibilities, and also, obviously, the talents of Michael Keaton. Um, Tim Burton's sensibilities plus Anton Furst's designs, for Gotham City. This is not an American city that has just been redressed for the screen. This is an imaginary place. It is. It is. I remember Roger Ebert, or I think it was Ebert, said at the time, or somebody said at the time, that it felt claustrophobic. That even though it was a widescreen picture, it was designed to look perfect on the small screen, because wherever you were closed in by, these ominous Gothic structures, of these towers. And it's not my term, but the notion of, it's almost like a snow globe world. We don't venture out of Gotham City in this picture, or the second one. We don't leave. The furthest we go is out into the county, to where Bruce Wayne lives. Um, you know, we get the sense that things are happening of national importance, but we don't actually see them. And it's not like the National Guard shows up to stop the Joker. Although I deal with that a little bit in this book. I deal with what must people think of this place, outside. This area. So yeah, I mean, so there's that element. Again, the fact that there's this sort of somber approach to it that Burton brings. This sort of, as I said, the sadness that is there. Also, I think that there's a degree of humor in there, again coming from Burton, again coming from Michael Keaton, again coming from just all of the performances. Obviously, Jack Nicholson, but everybody involved. I mean, they're aware of the material being being not your normal kind of movie or your normal kind of story, but there's no attempt to well, there are attempts to camp it up. But and again, I know there's a lot of people that don't even know what camp even means as an expression at this age. But the I think at every turn where the pictures could have gotten silly, they find their way back onto more solid ground. So there are certainly more jokes. There's certainly more. Certainly, it's a fun place to want to go back to. The most recent pictures. Or rather, I have not seen the Penguin yet because I don't have Max.
It's very good.
And I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is good. Obviously, it's a different kind of story being told, and it does not strike me that it is probably necessarily that fun a place. Whereas you can go see Batman 12 times in one summer and not be terribly depressed about the state of the world.
Talking to your editor, Tom, at Random House Worlds, he mentioned that you have read the excellent novel Superman Miracle Monday by Elliot S. Maggin, and possibly the previous novel, Superman Last Son of Krypton. And I was wondering what your thoughts on superhero novels and prose in general since the 70s. They keep trying to make this a thing, but they never seem to get a lot of traction.
I think that's in part because the comics are already in print. And so if you're a reader, you're already engaging with those characters in the format that is best designed to accentuate their abilities. What's happened though is over the years, one of the things that has happened is that the thought balloon died. Frank Miller actually killed it. So I mean, we get captions that will be in the point of view of a character, but we're no longer getting these pages that are thick with dialogue, thick with narrator explaining things, thick with people thinking out loud for us to see what they have to say about things. And so comics, I actually did a piece for Comics Buyer's Guide 20 years ago where we went through issues of Amazing Spider-Man every 5 years for 40 years. And we found out that there were originally about 6,000 words in every Spider-Man issue written by Stan Lee. And within 40 years, it had gone down to like 1,600 words. It is down by like 75%. And part of it is just the toolbox is different. You're not able to actually say what people are thinking most of the time. Because comics also, back in the day, those comics used to be drawn on much larger pages. So you could get more stuff on the page. Whereas now, me as a comics writer, and I still do write some comics, if I have more than 3 panels per page, I feel guilty for what I'm doing to the artist. And so one of the reasons why I've done more novels lately is I like that sort of long form. Let's get into some of these things that we couldn't get into on the regular page. Now, again, as you mentioned, comics novels, and they go some good ways back, have never on their own really been blockbusters. We think this has a chance to break this pattern because it's a movie novel. It's a movie novel in addition to being a comics novel. It is, as I say, it's the movie novel you didn't get in 1989, or at least that's sort of my the way I'm trying to imagine it. But this is something where I think that uh, it is supported by the front cover image, being the symbol from the movie. It's the most successful image in movie advertising history. Um, it is it is instantly recognizable. The trailers didn't even have the name of the movie in them. The commercials would end on just the shield. And within weeks, everybody in the world was wearing that logo, either on a shirt or shaved into their head or somewhere. It's something where the audience for a film is about 10 times larger than the audience of your average TV show, which is like 10 times larger than the audience for your average novel, or whatever the ratio is. And comics are also lower down on that thing. So yeah, I think you have a much better chance of taking something like this and making a mainstream hit of it, because the movie was a mainstream hit. And we'll just have to see. From what I've heard, it's very positive so far.
Well, I certainly hope so. I've pre-ordered my audiobook personally. Um, there have been some dedicated fans, and you mentioned this, that
Yeah,
analyze how Tim Burton was very inspired by comics and design from the 30s and 40s
right.
when he made Batman in '89. Did you yourself do any research into that kind of era or other things like crime history or Gothic architecture or martial arts in writing this book?
Well, definitely, I went back to the original stories where my villains appeared. And I went back and looked. I mentioned that my conversation with Michael Uslan years ago. This is before I'm even writing comics. This is when I'm editing for one of the comics magazines. I met him at San Diego, and he said, that he looked at it, that the first movie was Batman in the 30s, Batman with a gun. The second movie is Batman in the 40s. That's the Rogues Gallery starting to get established. Um, that Batman Forever is the 50s, where Robin plays a much bigger role. And then obviously Batman and Robin is Batman in the 60s. And so he said at the time, and this was before Batman Begins by several years, he said logically, if you extended it forward, your fifth movie would be a much grittier, Denny O'Neil thing, the 70s, which would be followed by The Dark Knight, the 80s, which would be followed by something more expansive, looking at Gotham as a whole, the 90s, and with something like Cataclysm, or I'm sorry, No Man's Land, as it connects to as what you saw in Batman, Dark Knight Rises. And darned if it isn't what they did. So I think I really like that. And so yes, I did that kind of research. I had conversations with my friend Brent Frankenhoff, who was sort of my beta reader on this, and also all my other novels. He was a former colleague at Comics Buyer's Guide. He was a DC fan growing up many years before I was getting everything. But no, I married a comic shop manager, and so she brought with her all the DC comics I didn't have. So, and then of course I've sort of been filling in the blanks of my own education ever since. But yeah, I have very much gone back and taken a look at these things, and it's the trick with connecting it back to the comics world is one where you gotta sort of be careful. I you know, I remember reacting at the time to seeing Bane in Batman and Robin, saying to myself, "That's too soon for this character. That's we're not up to the '90s yet," and I didn't even know I didn't even know what he was saying about that. It just didn't feel like it was within that. And so I'm very conscious of what I'm doing here, that it feels like this earlier version of Batman. And just about any time I came up with anything where I'm like, ooh, well, I could add this element, but that was an 80s or a 90s thing. And it's like, okay, just being 80s is puts it within the timeline here. But remember, the Gotham that we see on screen is this weird mix of the 40s and the 80s. Our main characters, as I mentioned, the Titans wandering through. Bruce Wayne gets to have modern dress. Vicky Vale gets to have modern styles and a great looking apartment. Alexander Knox gets to have a tape recorder portable, where everybody else has got flash cameras and things like that. And Yeah, so it's this kind of a weird melange of different timelines and different, or rather different eras, and fashion. Knox is walking around wearing a fedora and a trench coat and all of that. So anyway, yeah, I'm always conscious of how what I draw in from the comics or something else is gonna impact the whole.
Yeah, that I love the amount of thought that you've put into creating this. I think it's really going to pay off in readers, and hopefully they'll get it, whether they get it consciously or not. We do have a question from our esteemed editor in chief. As someone who's done a lot of both, Star Wars or Star Trek, preference wise.
Well, again, it depends on what kind of story I want to tell. I mean, if I want to do something with science in it, I can't do Star Wars. And if I want to do something where the characters are all arguing and bickering with each other, I really can't do Star Trek. It's one of the first things I was told on Star Trek is our people respect each other. They don't, the fellow officers don't insult one another in Starfleet. And it's like, okay, yeah, well, once they modernized that for the streaming series, that changed.
I was going to say,
they
I
do
don't think
pick on
that
each
rule
other.
applies in the Kelvin timeline either.
Well, I know exactly. So, but no, that was what Gene wanted, and so Roddenberry. So that is shifted a bit. But again, it just really depends on what kind of a thing I'm trying to tell. I love the fact in Trek that I'm able to use Earth history and Earth literature, and one of our dynamics. It comes from the TV show, is naming chapters or sections or books after real life historical phrases or things from literature. And so I spend a lot of time doing that. In Batman Resurrection, our section titles are all lines from the first movie, and they're all one particular character's lines from the first movie, and so that's gonna be some fun for folks.
Ooh, enticing. We have one last question for you. It's kind of a fun one, the very low stakes. But also, you have a lot going on. So the first part of this question is, do you still have time to read comics? And the second part is, if so, what's on your pull list these days?
Okay, the pull list is basically, I think the only thing that I read that's still an ongoing would be something like Knights of the Dinner Table, simply because it's still an ongoing. They've never actually, broken it up. And again, that's the D&D influenced humor series. What I'm doing is, because I have all these books. One of the dynamics, when I was writing for Comics Buyer's Guide, and editing the magazine Comics Retailer, I was getting comp from everybody, and so I have years and years and years of books that I've been needing to catch up on and read. So I will get out things like I think what did I just send back to the vault? I'd finally read Captain Carrot in the final arc. I finally read obviously whatever I need to read for research, I'm reading for research. But uh, I got on a kick where I decided I would fill in all my Bronze Age Marvel history that I didn't know by actually reading the collected editions of that stuff. Just because I tended to have the Silver Age stuff, and I tended to have the current stuff. I didn't have the stuff that was in between. So I'm sort of filling that stuff in. But yeah, what I like is trying to read these things and understand what was going on in the business at the time. That's something we haven't mentioned, is that I run a website called Comicron. And that is the website that it's the world's largest public database of comic book sales figures. And so I have everything on there from the 90s to when the numbers basically stopped in the early 2020s. Um, but then I also have a lot of stuff that's not up there. Sales figures from the 60s and 70s, and I've even got a lot of stuff going all the way back to the 30s, and it all will see the light of day. I in various means, either on the website or in some of the other projects that I'm working on. But I think that's always I find that fun as well, because I'll see things happening in the comics and I'll realize, okay, this is why this happened, because this was what was going on at the time. This is when the DC implosion hits, or something like that, or this is when this license was lost, or this is when the personalities changed, the personnel, and it just really yeah, it's that fun little thing that comes of being old and having seen so much of the stuff that you know why things are the way they are. And I'm able to come up with information that people either didn't know or the general public didn't know. I mean, it's probably not generally understood that Batman was not even close to being DC's most popular character before 1966. I mean, Superman and Superboy were both outselling him dramatically. He only goes to number one because of the TV show in 66, and goes more or less right back down when that fad ends. And Batman is really a middle tier seller, even at DC, uh, until we get to the mid 80s. And again, that's the kind of context that you just are not really going to have. And then, of course, after Batman 89 happens, everything blows up, and the first series that actually sees the real impact of Batman 89 is Legends of the Dark Knight, because that solicited for October. Actually, solicited for September, came out in October, but that was the first time that all the orders that the retailers placed in July were reflecting having seen what the movie did in June. And this resulted in there being a ridiculous number of copies ordered, so many copies that Paul Levitz and everybody else at DC were terrified of what will happen to the retailers when these truckloads of these comics showed up. And how did they deal with that? They dealt with that by putting four different color wraps on all the first issues of that, inadvertently setting off the variant cover craze. So
Huh. That's fast. I would love to read more about that stuff, because that's so interesting.
I have
Just
I
how
have
these
I have
things are
stuff like that
developed.
on Comicron, Comichron .com. There's a FAQ page where I have some essays. I think one of the fun essays that people, I think particularly longtime comics fans, will like. I've got a big thing on not just where comics numbering came from, why comics are numbered the way they are, unlike the way other magazines are. But how numbering is important to comics. I've got a feature on there where I went every 5 years and counted up how many series are in the 500s, the 400s, the 300s. And so you can see over time how that gets devalued here and there every time they think they want to, make a quick buck by rebooting everything. And then how they realize, oh gosh, we've lost something and we've got to go back. And so I coined the term legacy numbering back in the early 2000s. At least as near as I could tell, I coined it. I can't find anybody else who used it before I used it in the magazine. But again, you can look at that and see, stuff like, year one appeared in the middle of the Batman run. It was not renumbered for that purpose. It was not a miniseries. The impact of that was to raise the series sales long after Frank Miller was gone. Likewise, Jim Lee, Hush. Those were part of Batman 608. It could have been Batman Hush #1. And if it had been, the first issue probably would have sold even more. But it raised the level of the entire series. And why does that happen? It's because people forget to change their pull lists. And I know, but it's that there's an inertia built into the numbering system that retailers understand and that publishers don't always. And so believe me, I've lived through this. I did a series called Knights of the Old Republic that ran 50 issues at Dark Horse. And then when we did my successor series, Knight Errant, we were going to do 5-issue arcs, and they wanted to reboot the series title every one, and I'm like, guys, please don't, because every jumping on point is a jumping off point, and every time you have to restart the file on a title, you restart it from a different place. So anyway, but yes, Comicron, that's a fun place for people to find some stuff about the history of the comics industry and Batman in particular. They go to the 1989 page on monthly sales. I've got the actual sales charts from Diamond and Capital City when the film came out, and you can see the impact that it has almost immediately.
That's awesome. And that's for our readers. Comichron.com. I will have a link to that below. Actually, I should say listeners, not readers. But I wanted to thank you for coming on and talking to us. And it's been a pleasure. We are a little bit over time, but it was a great chat. And I'm really excited for Batman Resurrection.
Yep.
For our listeners, you can pre-order it or order it at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and among other book outlets. We'll have some links below for that too. And for more from John Jackson Miller, including his other novels and comics, you can visit him at farawaypress.com. Also find him on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads at John Jackson Miller, and on Twitter at JJM Faraway. And I'll have links to all those below too, so you don't have to just listen to me reading them off and then try to retype. For everything else Batman related, you can check out the batmanuniverse.net. We have comic reviews, movie news, podcasts like this one, and more. You can also join our Discord for in-depth discussions or write to us at tbu@thebatmanuniverse.net. If you like these episodes, please subscribe, rate, and share. Thank you for listening.